a couple questions to ask Jesus as you pray. Ask Him to show you your own heart. Ask Jesus to let you see your own heart. I know that Jesus is looking at you with compassion. And Jesus always is in the process of transforming us to another level of wholeness. Where is He wanting to do His work in you? Hello friends, I'm Dr. Carol. This is Relationship Prescription Podcast and our YouTube channel. If you are listening on the podcast, this is just a reminder to let you know that if you want to see video versions, you can join our YouTube channel or vice versa. I am so glad to hear from you often. Many people write to me with questions about relationships, and today I have gathered a few of the really tough questions that you have written to me about. And we're going to unpack these. These are marriage questions in particular, and some really challenging circumstances. As we come up to Valentine's Day, if you're listening to this when it first comes out, you know, this is a time when many people's thoughts turn to love and relationships and so on. And sometimes that's in marriage, and sometimes marriage can be a time of a lot of pain and loneliness as well. We're going to unpack some of those very big marriage challenges from questions real people have written. I haven't made these up. These are real people who have written into me with these questions. I want to encourage you as well. If you have a tough question, whether it's about relationships and marriage or whether it's something else, I really love hearing from you. You can leave a comment under this video if you're watching by video, or you can come to our website, drcarolministries.com, and use the Contact Us page there. If you leave a question there, it's confidential. I read those and I respond personally. And that's where these questions came from, people just like you. And let's bring some wisdom, God's truth, to some of these very challenging situations. The first one, this is from Ginger. She said, I have been married for 49 years. Never in the past have I had any reason to doubt my husband's faithfulness, but 3 years ago he became deeply emotionally involved with a young woman who was working for us as a contractor. Her husband had left her and her children. My husband stepped in immediately to become her rescuer. I became uneasy about their relationship. I asked my husband to stop talking to her about anything other than work. He became very angry and said I was making something up in my head, but he would stay within the boundaries I requested, so I backed off. Now, 2 years later, I'm suspicious again. I found text messages on his phone to this woman in which he refers to her affectionately and ends his text saying he loves her. He's very attracted to her children as well. I confronted him again, and once again, he says there's nothing wrong, and he will not now or ever believe this relationship is wrong. I don't believe that my husband and I can go forward unless he understands that this relationship with this other woman is wrong, unhealthy, and inappropriate. I need some counsel. Wow, tough. Certainly, most Christians would agree. In fact, many people, even not of the Christian faith, would agree that crossing the flesh barrier, having sex with someone who's not your spouse, is unwise, wrong, and whatever. But emotional affairs can be more challenging. And here comes a disconnect that the emphasis often in the Christian church on sex as behavior, and what's good and bad about sex is about what's good, what's on or not on the sin list, gets us into trouble. Connection, intimacy is not only about our physical bodies. It's also about mind and soul. God designed intimacy in marriage to be a connection of body, mind, and soul. And it absolutely is possible to cross barriers that are not the flesh barrier, but emotional barriers. And emotional affairs can have deep, painful consequences for everyone involved. So here's a couple truths to point out to you. First of all, You cannot convince your husband that this emotional connection is wrong. Simply trying harder and harder to reason with him is not likely to be successful. Now, I don't know the details, and only you and God and your husband know more about what degree this relationship with this other young woman is. But an emotional affair is dangerous, and if that is the case, you simply telling your husband that is not going to work. You can only change you. You can only change how you respond, boundaries you set, communication between you and your husband. Setting boundaries in a situation like this may feel very hard, but it may be what you have to do. If you find that you are not able to communicate in a reasonable way with your husband, that very likely may be a reason to get some outside help. The ways that you may try to communicate with your husband include not convincing him that he's doing something wrong, but pointing out the impact it is having on you. Something along the lines of, honey, I'm grateful for the 49 years that we have had, but this is damaging my heart and the connection between you and me. I am unwilling to allow the situation to continue as it is. I am being hurt. It is wounding me. And I need you to know that, and I want to address that. I want our marriage to continue in the way that God wants it to. If that kind of communication does not help, then you may need to set some boundaries. Something like, honey, I am making an appointment with a marriage counselor. I'm asking you to come with me. But if you don't, I am going anyway, because I need some help in dealing with this. There may come a time when you will need to set a boundary such as, if you do not come with me for marriage counseling so that we can address this, I may have to consult a lawyer about, a legal separation. Setting boundaries like that is hard, but it may be what you have to do. I want to honor and respect the struggle that you are in, and also remind you that you can only change you. I would invite, as you pray about this, to approach God with questions, not primarily asking God to do something. He may, He can, and God willing, your husband will receive the Holy Spirit's investment in his own heart. But for you, my encouragement would be approach God with, who do you need me to be to my husband in this season? And that will help you understand God's perspective and what you may be able to do next. This next situation is from a lady I'll call Amanda. She didn't leave her name, so we'll call her Amanda. She said, trust has been destroyed in our marriage. My husband and I are separated. He has been going to counseling from both our pastor and a marriage counselor, and they keep telling me to focus on the small positive steps my husband is making. All I can see is his continued narcissism and my fear that he will come back and push the boundaries until he is raping me again. When I read others' stories, though, my situation, I'm wondering if it's not so hopeless. How do I judge whether my situation is hopeless or not? I see no reason to start to trust him again. I really don't need or want him in my life at all. This is a problem in my heart now, isn't it? I think I need to hear from a woman. All my pastors are men, and they never bled for failing to give enough attention to their spouse one day. Well, Amanda, my heart bleeds as I hear your story. There are some marriages that are toxic, and you haven't said it in so many words, but you have alluded to your husband forcing you to have intercourse to the point that you have been physically harmed and bled. That's a toxic marriage. When the Bible says God hates divorce, it's not because divorce is some high on the hierarchy of things that make God unhappy. God hates it because it hurts his children. But there are some toxic marriages where the harm is greater than what would happen if you left. but my heart just bleeds with you. As far as trust, there is a difference between forgiveness and trust. Forgiveness only depends on you, and Jesus said you must forgive. God commands us to forgive. Forgiveness is letting it go. Forgiveness is giving up your right to exact revenge on that other person. You can forgive whether that person acknowledges they're wrong, whether they're even still alive. Trust is different. Trust requires both people. And for you to be able to trust again, you would need evidence that the future would be different than the past. Now, trust can be rebuilt in a marriage, but from your description of your husband, that would require that you see evidence that your husband is becoming a different person. That can happen. How long do you wait? What do you do in the meantime? The possibility that God is releasing you from this marriage is a sobering one. But there are times that God does that. Again, I want to encourage you to go to God with a question and ask for Him to show you His perspective on your marriage. I am certain that your emotions are very, very hooked. A lot of pain and uncertainty. Ask for God's perspective on your marriage. Now, getting human input is good, and that's perhaps why you reached out to me as a woman, woman to woman. Other people's perspective helps, but I believe that God is the one who can release you from a marriage, meaning that in your heart to hear from God about whether or not this is the time to step away. Now, God does not usually tell us the whole future. He usually only tells us one step at a time. And you can count on Him to make clear just the next step. I would ask Him to let you see His perspective on your husband's heart. God sees your husband without angst. In other words, with both truth and love. God's perspective on your husband's heart will help you know if your husband is open to change. Ask God to show you your perspective on your own heart. From your note, my belief is that God sees your own heart and grieves with you the pain that you have experienced. I don't know whether your husband is open to truly being changed from the inside out. But if he is not, then I believe that God would be releasing you from this marriage. And so again, coming to God with questions. Our next question is from Erna. She said, I need help. My husband had been divorced for 2 years. I had been divorced for 10 years, and he and I have now been together for a year. My 3 sons and their families accepted him from the start. His sons, however, had lots of questions, and his daughter hardly greets me, not even at our wedding. She's been to our house 4 times, but always cuts me out of any conversation. I said after the last visit that it was her last visit. My husband's sister is also still friends with his ex and tries to control many things about our lives. And then, when we were on holiday recently, my husband would always refer to our business, our gardener, at our house, etc., referring to his ex. Am I wrong to complain? Blended families are complicated. I have been part of a blended family. I never had any children of my own. When God brought my loving husband into my life, he had 2 boys that at the time were grown, and they have families and children of their own. And thankfully, they now, even after my husband's death, still invite me to be part of their lives, and I am grateful. But not all blended families experience that, and a healthy blended family takes time. That's one of the really important things I learned in my own journey, and also from blended family expert Ron Deal. Many times, the husband and the wife who get married, in creating a blended family, husband and wife feel like, oh, our relationship, we love each other, and we're just going to, going to go forward. That's all that's important. But with the other people in the families around, the extended family, children at whatever age, young or adult, the relationship you have with them is the speed at which that relationship develops is dependent on how fast they want that relationship to develop. You cannot expect or require that your husband's children or your own children feel good about your marriage. That is up to them. You cannot control that. One of the things I learned in marrying into the family that my husband had raised and becoming part of that family, I had to learn that when I married, I was marrying into the whole bunch. And I could not dictate how they responded to me. I could only be an invitation. Now, Erna, especially as you describe your husband's daughter, it very well may be that she should be doing things different, but your demand that she do things different will only push her farther away. It will only create more hostility. My encouragement to you is that you take it out of your own feelings, which can be hard because you're now, the stepmother, your husband's wife, and you have feelings and you want to be respected and cared about. But again, that's not up to you. So my encouragement is to be a safe and inviting place so that at whatever such time as your husband's children and their families want to have a relationship with you, that it is safe for them to do so, that you become a safe place. And I would also encourage you to have some conversations with your husband about the relationship aspects between the two of you, that this is about your marriage, not about his ex or about your ex. Now, the truth is that your husband had a previous marriage and so have you. Ignoring those realities will not work. But that doesn't mean that your marriage now should not be about the two of you. So I would approach conversing with your husband along the lines of, when you refer to your ex as our, my heart hurts. I want this marriage to be about us. Can we do that? Now, if your husband, just 2 years divorce is not a long time, if your husband is still emotionally connected with his ex, there may be some bigger challenges in your marriage now. And it may be that you will need some outside help. So might want to consider that as well. Our next comment comes from Zane. And he wrote, "My life has been very frustrating since I lost my wife to cancer 8 years ago. My second marriage that I rushed into was a disaster. The frustrations have more to do with me. I expected the same life sexually, and that is one of the big frustrations. My wife was 52 when she died, and we had been together 36 years. I suppose I'm expecting too much in a relationship now. I am 65. Thank you for your articles." Jane, my heart goes out to you in the grief process. When I lost my husband, now 6 years ago, that grief process is hard. And if you have not adequately walked through the grief process, another relationship becomes especially difficult. And for whatever aspect of grief over your first wife's death that may be unfinished, know that more healing is possible. You can continue to walk through that grief process at whatever stage, however many years it's been. What that grief process involves is feeling the feelings and experiencing the hurt and the loss. You do that with people and with Jesus. If you are married now, your current wife may not be the best one to walk that through, but grieving takes time, and it's an important and difficult process. If you have not gone through grief share, it might be appropriate for you to do that now, even though it has been 8 years since your wife passed away. As far as sex, it's an important part of a marriage, but it also is not something that is automatic. You're not entitled. Working to grow a healthy intimacy with your wife takes time. Entering a second marriage, expecting it to be like the first, you've discovered, it sounds like, that doesn't work. But on the intimacy side, I would encourage you to look at intimacy as more than sex. I hear you, as a man, sex is important, and yes, it is. But if you are looking to your wife to get sex for your own needs, I would encourage you to look beyond that. I would encourage you to be seeking your wife's heart before seeking her body, or at least as much as seeking her body. I would encourage you to have some conversations with your wife now about what kind of marriage do you want to build together. It sounds like the first several years of your second marriage have been very, very rocky. That's understandable. It's sad, but it can still get better. Have some conversations about the kind of relationship that you want to build together. And then as far as sex itself, remember that when Jesus lived here on this earth, he was a fully human male with all the hormones and sex drive that every human being has. He understands what it's like to have a sex drive and to not be married. Jesus never had sex, he was never married, but he was the most fully alive human being ever to walk this earth. So when sex becomes a problem, remember, Jesus understands what those feelings are like in you. He is a safe place that you can bring your frustrations to. And I would encourage you to go to him with your frustrations, sexually and otherwise. Consecrate your sexuality to him and invite him into the middle of your marriage, not to get sex, but to bring wholeness, healing, and connection, physically, emotionally, and spiritually between you. One more question that I want to address. This is from Luke. We have some really tough marriage situations here that we're talking about today. But here is a question from Luke, who wrote, "We have been separated since the end of June 2021. My wife left me for another man. We have a 4-year-old little girl, and this has greatly impacted her. I've tried waiting. I've allowed my wife to come back home 3 different times. Each time she has gone running back to her lover. This has been the hardest 6-7 months of my life. I have made mistakes as well, early on in our marriage, and I came clean to her about it. We worked through it, or so I thought, but she still hasn't forgiven me, it seems. I'm not sure whether to file for divorce or to keep holding out for her. I know we both have biblical divorce situations, but I also know it's the Lord's will for us to reconcile. I'm desperate, I'm confused. I prayed and cried and pleaded with God. What do I do?" Well, Luke, a really big, painful situation. I first want to acknowledge the pain and encourage you not to go through this alone. As a father, as a husband whose wife has left, you very probably feel very, very alone and isolated. And it may be hard for you to believe that anybody else can really be much of a help to you. But God designed us to live and grow in community, and especially at a painful time like this, you need one or a few other people with you to walk through this. You didn't say in your note whether or not you're already doing this, and I have written to you encouraging that, but you need somebody to help you in this, to give you some perspective and some encouragement, and to cry with you, etc. That may be a pastor who's skilled in this area. It may be a Christian counselor or therapist. It may be a good friend or a few buddies in church that can just walk with you, lift you up, and support you. I would also like to comment on a couple ways to pray. Through this podcast, you've heard me mention a couple kinds of questions that I encourage people in troubled marriages to ask Jesus. I have an article on our website, Ways to Pray About Your Troubled Marriage. We'll link to that under this video and in the show notes to this podcast. But a couple parts of that, I believe, are especially important here. A couple questions to ask Jesus as you pray. Ask him to show you your own heart. Ask Jesus to let you see your own heart. I know that Jesus is looking at you with compassion. And Jesus always is in the process of transforming us to another level of wholeness. Where is he wanting to do his work in you right now? Ask him to help you see your wife's heart. Even though you're separated and she's living with this other person, ask him to show you, how does he see her heart? How does he see the relationship between you and your marriage? Remember, when Jesus looks at you, he sees all the truth about your own heart, about your wife's heart, about your marriage up until this point. He sees all the truth. He sees the reality of the pain that both your wife and you have both experienced. And he also sees you, your wife, and your marriage as the beautiful thing that he wants to create out of it. Now, that is also dependent on your wife's choice, and he will not override your wife's choice. But to think in terms of the beautiful thing that God wants to create out of this really horrible situation. And then ask Jesus, what next step do you want me to take? When Jesus invites himself into our process, he rarely just steps in and does it all. It's almost always inviting us to work with him in moving to the next step. What is the next step that Jesus is inviting you to do? That may be taking your hands off your wife for now so that God can do his work in her. It may be the next step for you is connecting with somebody healthy, a counselor, a pastor, a couple buddies from church, to work on your own heart. I do know that God has a good future for you. It will not be easy, regardless of whether this marriage ends or whether restoration is coming. It will be difficult, and God will walk with you through that. You need to stay close to him in this process. And please don't do this alone. Get some help. As you can see, if you're listening or watching to this episode, I hear regularly from people who are facing really tough challenges. If that's you, I would be happy to hear from you as well. You can use the contact page on our website, drcarolministries.com/contact, or click the contact link in the show notes or under this video, and you can feel free to send me a confidential message about your situation. I read and respond personally. I want to let you know too that one of the things I do, and I'm honored to do, is individual coaching. If you are interested in some individual coaching for your challenging situation, I would be honored to connect and communicate with you about what coaching for your situation might look like. We also have a number of resources about marriage and tough things in marriage on our relationships page on our website, and I would encourage you to check that out as well. Thank you to those of you who have written about these challenging marriage situations, and I pray that you sense Jesus' presence in your own being and in your marriage. That's where He wants to be. Let Him do His work in you and between you. Until next time, may God bless you.